Brought to you by BedroomBattlefields.com. This is the Tabletop Miniature Hobby Podcast. So welcome to the podcast, Alex. How are you doing today?
Not doing too badly. Thanks for having me on.
So there's a couple of main talking points that I'm excited to dig in about with you. Travel-friendly gaming, want to talk a bit about that, and want to talk a wee bit about 15mm scale as well, a scale that I'm completely new to, but I think I'm going to be diving into head first quite soon, because we love that in this hobby, don't we? Just diving into something head first and spending money and accumulating things.
The less research and anticipation, the better.
Yeah, the more impulse, yeah. So, and I suppose the two aren't mutually exclusive, I would expect, given the size and scale of 15mm. I'm supposing that that lends itself to being taken on tour, if you like, as well, doesn't it?
A lot better than 28mm does. The number of games that are out there which are otherwise perfectly well written and perfectly suited to the average gamer. The number of them that depend upon a 4-foot table or a 6 foot by 4 foot playing area. Even if you take travel out of the equation, that's sometimes more of an obstacle than many game makers seem to consider.
So just for the listeners' context, there's been a few photos that you've put up on the Discord of these wonderful wee cases that you've been making, and it looks to me like you're preparing these so that you could basically take a war game on the go with you. Is that pretty much accurate?
Largely, with varying degrees of success. So we had a very nice charity shop nearby the last place we were in before we moved down here, which specialised in crafts and hardware. And amongst that hardware, they included a lot of toolboxes, drill cases, all manner of containers. So I, for the princely sum of up to £3, bought back some old drill cases and started putting terrain into them along the sort of lines that one might have dreamed of having as a teenager. And now that we've got less time and more money to play around with, that's finally something we can start. One could start doing it at this age. But so ultimately, I've made a few of these different cases, all with fixed terrain, all sort of creating different little biomes that one can game in. So I've done underground caverns, done open fields, ruins, forests, and the like, and learnt plenty of lessons all along the way, such as there's only so much space in a drill case for one's hand if you don't plan for it. So it's a learning experience. But there was a successful test run only a few weeks ago of taking a Makita drill case on a holiday, and which worked fairly well, but it does somewhat still rely on there being just enough space that you don't have to space in the car so that you don't have to try and you're not having to prioritize underpants or gaming. I wouldn't want to say which one would win out in that scenario.
Aye, well, there's only so many pants you could take on holiday, I suppose. So, got to make room for the games. Have you had a test run? Then you're saying you've taken one away.
We did take it with us. And my wife was happy for me to squirrel myself away in a corner of the rented property, away from everyone every so often, just to play games. And it was a relatively successful endeavour. Certainly better than previous attempts when I've tried dragging trays with me, which have ended up a bit battered and bruised. I managed to have a good few games of 5 parsecs from home and 5 leagues from the Borderlands. So it's solo games only at this stage. So it's not seen the blood of battle with 2 opposing generals. But we're working up to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. From what I've seen of the photos, it's not like you're limited to, only a few games. Like you're saying, you've got loads of different settings already that you've built, so you could pretty much adapt most skirmish rule sets, or most rule sets, to be honest, to this scale, couldn't you?
In essence, all I do is take the same rules that everyone else plays with and change any reference to inches into centimetres, and that seems to work pretty well for the majority of Ed cases.
Talk us through the process of putting one of these together then, and the sort of materials that you're using.
There's a whole lot of planning that doesn't get done, which I'm trying to work at doing a bit more of. Ultimately, materials are accumulated. As wargamers, we hoard a lot, and if we start then reasoning that we can start hoarding all of our otherwise recyclable goods, then that's a recipe for a large pile of rubbish underneath one's desk, but also a lot of building material to play with. So the stuff that I was making the Makita case out of, a lot of scrap corked floor tiles, indeed a lot of corks. They make very nice cliffs, padded out for mountains and stuff like that, with a lot of offcuts from various different projects just to build it up, and then everything covered over with a good layer of caulk seems to make everything look relatively scale friendly.
Mm-hmm. And what were the settings you said you've created again?
So in the Makita case, it was I essentially took both the lid and the main part of the container, and well, they provided two either the scope for two long boards, or as I did, I split those into half again. So there are four different terrains in there. One half was a underground sort of cave system, which could open out onto a hilly / rocky terrain, and then the other one was a foresty biome, which could then transition into some ruins. So the idea was that you've got the four very distinct terrains, and then if you wanted, you could essentially just plonk two pieces of paper at both ends of the lid, for example, and then you'd have a board which would allow you to have half a cave system and half a hilly terrain, sort of a hillside area. So there's, just to give a little bit more variety than just being stuck with the same four time and again. Yeah,
it sounds great. I mean, and the photos look great as well, and it reminds me, like, these look far better in all ways, but it reminds me a wee bit of my daughter's got this farmyard in a tin. It's like, I mean, it literally is as it sounds. It's a tin, and there's a farmyard in it, so it's like a little green mat, and there's like wooden trees, there's a farmer, a tractor and stuff like that. And I was always thinking, like, could you get a war game in there? But like the stuff you've made, it's bigger. But it's. I
mean, I have had to restrain myself from buying various different examples of such a toy collection from various different charity shops, knowing that that'll just add to the pile.
The Grimdark Future in a tin from Oxfam. It's like £1, and maybe there's a Kickstarter in there somewhere.
There could be. I can't say that I'd be one leaping to buy it. I do struggle with. This is more of a personal thing, but I do struggle with trying to envision what a piece of junk or a piece of scrap could become. I've seen lots of brilliant examples, and even on the Discord, I've seen examples of people who've turned junk into spacecrafts and what have you. I can never envision it, and it's usually just the process of cutting something up, moving it around, and starting to glue it together. And then once I've done that, and I'm sort of stuck with a skeletal form, I then find myself compelled to at least try and try and rescue it from disaster, which generally gets passable outcomes, but it's not ideal.
No, I mean, I think based on what I've seen, these look brilliant. Like, they really do. So the scale of the miniatures that you're using for these games, is it typically 15mm? Do you go smaller scale as well?
They have been typically 15mm up to this point. I have got some 6mm now being right beside me here, ready to be varnished. But no, the 15mm has been, I found, has been a nice a nice middle ground between the detail of 28mm and the sort of the epic scale potential of 6mm. I mean, in fairness, I find a lot of the 28mm stuff nowadays almost overtly intricate in how it's detailed. So even from a personal preference point of view, and even if I was treating everything as inches as they are intended in the rule sets, I'd probably still stick with 15mm. It's just got it's difficult to say. When 15mm is done well, it's not because it's gotten all of the extra skulls and pouches stuck onto the various different limbs. It's because it's been designed in such a way that it creates character without requiring a huge amount of eye candy. Mm-hmm. I suppose the equivalent would be treating like saying, I prefer Calvin and Hobbes to any photorealistic stuff that you see in media today. There's just a few lines creates a much more evocative image in my mind, and yes, and it's a darn sight easier to paint.
Yeah, but the 15mm thing, it was just like an epiphany. I don't think I've ever used that word before, but an epiphany one day of like, it just came to me, like I should get into 15mm. And I think my train of thought was that I'd kind of shelved, like I've got 6mm stuff and I admire the scale and I get it, and I kind of bought into that, but I wasn't enjoying painting it. Part of that, I think, was my fault for doing it wrong, if you like, for building the units and then trying to paint them, which is obviously...
We do know that this hobby can very much be done wrong.
Yeah, and if there's a wrong way, I'll find it. So
no,
I think...
I'm curious because I've seen a number of your 28mm stuff on the Discord, and it's looked great. But I don't think I've seen any of your 6mm stuff. Have you posted anything up
Potentially
there?
Just one or two pictures. I think I've taken a picture of it before, but to be honest, it's just a 3-colour, very basic. And I wasn't enjoying painting the army, and I don't know that. I think there was a couple of reasons for it. I think, again, I admire the ethos of the scale, but I don't know about completely removing individuality. Like, I like character still, so obviously 28mm lends itself brilliantly to skirmish games. Like Rangers of Shadow Deep and Frostgrave and that. I really like this idea, 8 or 9 guys at 28mm. But I'm almost thinking of 15mm now as what I'm going to call the Goldilocks scale. Like 6mm, too small, 28mm, too big, if we're talking about mass battles. And I'm looking at 15mm, I'm like, that's kind of just right for me, because there's still enough detail in there for there to be individuality and character, but we're not going too little and we're not going too big. So I think it looks really sustainable, it looks really affordable, and it just looks like a lot of fun. I'm on the right lines there.
You look like you sound like you've bought in entirely and fully almost fully indoctrinated right already. Have you bought any of them yet? That's the question.
My cart's open. No, I'll ask you for some recommendations in the moment. But yeah.
I think I saw your interest in the alternative armies stuff, which is a very good option. But I do occasionally miss the 28mm options, mostly in terms of the customization that you can do with the plastic or the different plastic kits. So that now that North Star's coming out with all of these wonderful sci-fi sort of generic sci-fi crew kits, I do have a strong temptation every so often to dive back in, but I just need to remind myself that I've barely got enough space for the 15mm in terms of storage area. It does have there is a lot of character that you can fit into a 15mm figure, and there's a lot of options. There are a lot of options out there in terms of creating your own army. If you have a real hankering for being able to glue individual arms and legs to different torsos to create your own figure, then it's possibly not quite the right scale. But if you're happy to take someone else's vision, slightly alter it with some green stuff or repaint it entirely differently, then it's it's got a lot of potential for most people, and I think it needs almost like the scale needs a few more celebrity figures or celebrities who are be able to sort of advertise its wonders for it to grab holes. But at the moment, it's still very much a niche part of the hobby, especially as far as sci-fi and fantasy goes. It's much more readily accepted amongst the historical gaming community.
Wait till this podcast throws its weight behind it. There'll be literally 3s, 4s amounts of people getting into it. So
I'll get my family involved. I'm sure they'll be gagging to get their hands on some 15 mils after 20 years of resisting.
Yeah. So what? You've touched on the popularity of it there. Why? One of the questions that springs to mind is, why do you think 15 mil isn't getting that kind of coverage? I mean, I suppose the elephant in the room here is 28 mil is so popular because of GW. There's no getting around that. But 15 mil, I know more about 6 mil than I do 15. What do you think is kind of causing it to be not getting that spotlight shone on it yet?
I suspect one thing is that I'm going to completely... I haven't said it yet, so I don't have to retract it. But I was going to say that you can't get quite the same quality of paint job on it, so it's not quite as pretty on Instagram. But that's not true. On some forums I've been on, there are some exquisite paint jobs that you wouldn't recognise a figure as being 15 mil. You'd happily guess that it was 30 mil. It's remarkable that people can even get eyes onto some of these things. But, in all honesty, it must be. I'm just going to say it's the Games Workshop effect. If people come into the hobby, and as I do, there are quite a few steps and garden paths that you've got to travel down to be able to even sort of become aware of just how vast or how great the scope is for smaller scales beyond what you get with Warhammer. I mean, everything with Warhammer seems to be focused, and this is fantasy and 40k and Age of Sigmar and what have you. Warhammer as the coverall term. Everything seems to be concerned about making things bigger to try and fit more on. And when you've got that weight of marketing behind you, it's similar to the Apple effect. A lot of people think that they've got to have an Apple, whereas whilst an iPhone can be very nice and very handy, I suspect a lot of people don't actually, or wouldn't be much worse off with a cheaper Android phone that does pretty much the same job. I mean, you haven't got quite the weight of great photography models being produced every other week that you get with a great gaming behemoth like Games Workshop.
That irony of scale creep as well, like you're talking about, Games Workshop. It seems like every year it's bigger, but the irony of that, or the trade-off, is that you fit less on the table. So these guys are becoming bigger and bigger, but you could get less of them. So in going big, they're actually getting smaller. And I mean, you could argue we've seen that already because they've been fantasy battles for Age of Sigmar, so they went the skirmish route. So it's almost like, that's the trade-off, is just smaller battles, really. So with 15 mil, what's your painting process, and how does it differ from how you would approach painting a 28mm miniature?
Well, I wouldn't say that my process differs much, and that there's not really a great deal of process. I've got an appalling attention span, so I very much paint in fits and bursts. I can't do marathon sessions. I need to have something that I can flip my attention between. I am very much of the butterfly attention span that is very much prevalent nowadays. So I would generally take for instance the figures I've got next to me now. They're 6 mil. There's only 10 of them, and it's taken me several days to put 3 different colours across them. And if I were painting in 28 mil, and indeed when I paint 15 mil, my process is no different. And so what you can get painted in 5 or 10 minutes on a smaller model means you just get much less painted on the larger one. So a 28 mil figure could take me weeks or months. So 15 mil, when I first started doing them, it was an absolute joy to suddenly be able to start something at the beginning of the week and then at the end of the week actually have something worth holding up and saying, I could play with that now, and not feel that fleeting moment of guilt that you're sending a half-painted model onto the battlefront. But, I mean, yeah, in terms of a slightly more step-by-step process, I think it's not too dissimilar to yours in that I'll stick a base coat down. It'll usually be an undercoat of gesso and another craft paint mixed in to create sort of usually a grey or a brown base coat. I'll then dry brush that with a white. I'll then stick a wash on, usually Army Painter Strong Tone, and then dry brush it again. And the benefit of that is that for all those little details that aren't necessarily obvious to the eye when you're holding up a nice newly crafted, newly produced figure, you're able to see all of those details which the dry brush brings to the fore. And so what your eye can see is generally what everyone else will see when it's fully painted, so you know what to focus on.
Mm-hmm. Do you use contrast paints at all?
I find contrast paints don't work quite as well unless you're coating the whole figure. So next to me, I've got some off-brand Space Marines, which I was able to coat in a blue speed paint, and that worked well. But if you're trying, even on 15 mil, to use it on different use it on different parts, articles of clothing, or equipment, backpacks, or weapons, it doesn't work quite so well. It works much better as a stainer. So if you paint it one base coat and then go over it with a contrast paint or a speed paint, that works a lot better. It's just to provide a bit of variety, so you're not putting the same brown onto every model. Mm-hmm. In terms of actually benefiting from the shading that comes with it, I don't think it works quite so well. The figures are possibly a little bit too small for that. That said, with these off-brand Space Marines, all of those complaints that people have about contrast paints not working on flat surfaces, not an issue, because every surface essentially counts as a non-flat surface, mm-hmm. even the shoulder pads.
Mm-hmm. One of the issues I have with 6mm, even when we come across miniatures that are very well made, is when you have things like spears and that, I find that they get very easily bent because they're so tiny. Do you still come across that issue in 15mm at all?
Depends on the sculpt. Usually, I have not had many weapons break. I think I've had a couple of breakages, which were actually 3D prints ordered from Etsy, and I suspect that was largely the rigours of travel via the postal service as much as anything else. Mm-hmm. But even these models that have got nice, sort of very, very, very fine sword handles or hilts or frying or spear handles or spear shafts or what have you, if they're of a decent enough metal concoction, whatever the mix is, I find that they bend back into shape pretty easily. And from my experience working with 28mm metal models, there's not a huge difference. Usually the people creating these 15mm models are aware of it, and so there are fewer obvious bend points or break points. So, I mean, I'm not particularly careful with how I look after my miniatures. I have gone down the route of sticking magnets underneath each one of them, so that in transit there's less knocking about, which probably mitigates it somewhat. But even when I've had sort of an over-enthusiastic elbow take out a couple of figures or I've lent on something, I don't think there's been I've not had any breakages of something I've already painted, which is a mercy. Which is not something I could say of for the 28mm stuff that I did growing up.
Tell us a wee bit about basing in 15mm. What are you basing individual models on? What sort of size are the bases? And are you doing any sort of multi-basing in that as well with your units?
I don't do any multi-basing. I mean, I remember you asking about the size of bases that one could put 15mm on. And as you saw with the image that I showed you, all of mine were essentially stuck onto washers. I will say that the basing is probably the one thing I miss most about 28mm, in that I can't stand doing bases. So with 28mm stuff, I usually just get a hole punch out a piece of plastic binding cover, and stick the model down on top of that, so you've got a clear base. So you don't have to worry about crafting anything, because I have no interest in painting more earth. Can't do that with 15mm, because there's just not enough surface area on the feet for that to be a long-term option. So I get a washer with a washer that's got a big enough hole in the middle for me to stick a magnet up, and then stick the figure on top and cover it all up with a mixture of sand, PVA glue, paint, and caulk, and that generally holds everything in place. But I've seen people doing much better jobs than that.
You're not multi-basing. Is that to do with the rule sets that you prefer to use?
That's more of a personal preference. I came to Games Workshop getting fascinated back when they released High Elves, and that was sort of the gleam in my eye. Or that was very much the shiny object that grabbed 12-year-old me and got me wrapped in the hobby. And I did collect, and I even managed to paint a few units, but I never played with them because I just never had the interest in mass battles. So I got more involved in the Games Workshop's Lord of the Rings arm, and never really looked back. So I've only ever done skirmish gaming since then.
What companies do you buy from then? What are some of your favourite companies for sourcing 15mm stuff?
Well, Alternative Armies is a good one. They've got a wonderful range. They've got very much old school type stuff with much more exaggerated proportions. The detail that they have on there is it's not necessarily finely detailed, but it's wonderfully, not quite cartoonish, but if you were to try and craft a proportionate figure in relation to how big a guy actually is, I think it would be far too fragile at the ankles. Not particularly interesting to paint, and not particularly interesting to look at a distance. Whereas alternative armies very much have something that is able to catch the eye and portray the character that you want in each figure.
Yeah, they look great. They're based in Scotland, I've seen on their website, which is pretty cool. And I love their army packs, like got chaos and skeletons and stuff like that.
15mm does seem to be one of the. I haven't seen many 15mm companies based in Nottingham, which is something of a rarity in this hobby. Mm. But yeah, I mean, so I saw that you were taking an interest in alternative armies. What were you looking to do yourself? Were you wanting to create full scale armies to take in mass battles? Are you going to be painting two armies, or are you getting someone else to paint the other half?
No, I think that's my plan, is mass battles. This is going to be my mass battle scale. So I've got pretty much all I'll ever need for skirmish games, both in sci-fi and fantasy now, in 28mm, which I'm very happy with. But looking for the mass battle experience, like I say, 6mm is just not quite working for me. So I think 15mm, I'm just going to build up two armies. I'm thinking maybe 6-7 units aside, and just put together two of them. So like I was saying to you, the army packs that you could get from them look really good. The price as well, I like the price. You know, when you see, I don't know, like £1 a figure and stuff like that, that satisfies me. That
I haven't seen that for a long time for 28mm. No, certainly the mass-produced stuff.
Aye. I've seen CP models, which I like. I've bought for them in the past. I think they've got a 15mm section on their website too. Really like them. They do.
I have to say I ordered a batch of 6mm stuff from them without having spotted this 15mm at all, and really regretting it, because looking at those sculpts and looking at what other people have done with them, they look really characterful. And then it turned out that some 15mm stuff that I'd gotten in some eBay job lots actually came from them, and they've been a joy to paint. Their stuff focuses much more on the sort of the swords and sandals type fantasy genre, encompassing Conan the Barbarian, what have you. So they're very much of a particular facet of fantasy. But yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed painting their robes. The robes were lovely to paint on the cultists.
Any other companies that you tend to check out or buy from?
Ooh, I mean, certainly with sci-fi, you've got Ground Zero Games, which I think are based actually not too far away from me. What else have we got? We've got Splintered Light Miniatures, which are a US-based one, but I have found a UK supplier. The joy of there being such a strong showing of historical gaming in 15mm means that there's a lot of faux historical figures historical figures that you could turn into faux historical figures. So you've got anything related to the Crusades would give you a good number of knights and men at arms and what have you. 100 Years' War, if you're looking to become a little bit more modern. Ultimately, I look for 15mm for a lot of 15mm historical figures, and convert them into fantasy. Usually with nothing more than a slightly zany hair color. Scotia Grendel is another one. Plastic Soldier Company have some very nice plastic 15mm stuff, which you can get en masse. So yeah, 100 Years' War stuff, Romans, Celts. So if you're looking to get a really large number of horde units, then I think that's a very good one to look for. Off the top of my head, those are the main ones, but I know I'm missing out a fair number. Ralpatha. I don't know the exact history with Ralpatha Europe, because I think they're quite an old gaming company or a miniature company, but whether that originated in the UK, which is where it seems to be based now, or in the US, I don't know. But they've got some very good old school minis, where you get war bands of 10 to 12 or 14 units for £5. As you say, it's a very economical. I say very economical. It's much more economical than 28mm.
Yeah. Ralpatha are like the anti-scale creep. Like their 28mm stuff is now probably about 15mm. They seem to go down the way. I've bought some of their 28mm guys before, and they're like kids compared to some of the bigger guys that I've got. But I like the aesthetic of their stuff as well. So
you need kids in fantasy as well.
I know.
Nothing wrong with bringing in some child soldiers.
They're the next generation, aren't they? So, you got much coverage of 15mm stuff? So your blog is there could have been snakes.com, am I right?
Yeah, that's right.
So on your site, you've got it looks like you've got a 3-part series on your travel cases, don't you? So I'm going to put a link to those in the show notes, so we could see some pictures, can't we?
Yeah, I'm not very good at taking pictures of things in process, but the travel case, and indeed the floor tile, sort of the tiles that I made before that, were some of the few occasions when I've taken pictures halfway through, mainly because it took me so long to do anything with them. Mm-hmm. I'd happily have a fit of enthusiasm, tackle it, go to town with my glue gun, and then let them gather dust, which probably helps with a little bit in the way of texture.
Thanks very much for listening to this episode of the Tabletop Miniature Hobby Podcast. If you enjoy the show, then please do share it with someone else you think might enjoy it too. And be sure to check out our Discord community of like-minded hobbyists, which you could find at bedroombattlefields.com/Discord. It'd be great to see you in there.